And so we're going to talk about this evening, I think, the peak to peak. And I won't write principle to progress. And what it's about is adopting the time lifeline. Remember way back in Life Formula, and certainly a number of times subsequent to that, we've talked about the time lifeline, which is the line that extends between this moment now and the questionable place in the future when we cease to exist. And it involves time and energy, which in itself is your life. Mm-hmm. And what this is about is that at this point now, an individual exists along this time lifeline with a certain stature. We know that somehow when the stature grows, you attract success. I mean, people tend to, and we look at strategizing, tend to crowd around and to elevate you for your best interest as well as theirs. Remember how that worked out?
Yes.
And so the idea is to go from here and know that somehow, over a period of time, you will have grown in stature. Okay? Now, a peak, in order to do that, would mean that you would have to prepare and to make a contribution in order to attain that stature. Okay? Now, this is in concert with strategizing, with puzzling, and all the things that we've talked about. The only thing of it is, it doesn't work that way. In other words, when this little person here looks out at this, okay, what they get is blue sky. You ever heard that expression?
I have.
Yeah, blue sky. Illusion, okay, not real. I don't know how many times in the last, 30, 40 years I have encountered young people who were determined that they're going to be millionaires by the time they're 30 or 35. And I said, well, how are you going to do that? And they said, well, I don't know. I just believe I am, and I know I'll do it. Well, that's not enough. It's not going to work that way. That's illusionary. Because this just doesn't work. Now, actually what has to occur, we take the same time lifeline, same person with the stature here, with the intention of growth in order to become an achiever. Okay? There has to be the vision. Knows at all times you've got to be able to see what it is you want to accomplish. Mm-hmm. We talked about telesthesia in the past. We've talked about crystallizing. Remember? Structuring our life and kind of looking forward to see the way we want it to be. With that being the case, what has to happen in order to achieve that is you've always got to be able to keep that in your eye, in your sight. And so this is a peak experience. In other words, you prepare and you make a contribution and you grow this much from the experience. And then from that position you prepare and you make a contribution and you prepare and make a contribution, and prepare and make a contribution, and so on until down here, this step essentially is just as easy as this one was. Okay?
I see.
But this is about vision, about being able to see what that's about and the willingness to prepare. Remember we talked about that the will to win doesn't mean so much unless you have the willingness to prepare in order to make those contributions. Now, it's not going to be that way either. Okay, we keep going. There's another step in here where this is the time lifeline.
Yes.
This is where you want to be. I mean, this is where you are. This is where you want to be. Same principle. Okay. You have to have this vision always in sight. Okay, and so you start out and you prepare and you make a contribution, prepare and make a contribution, prepare and make a contribution, prepare and make a contribution, and somewhere along in here, there's probably going to have to be some of these. Okay, and those minor ones. And then there's a certain point, then you can probably go on and achieve what it is you want. Now these are maturation points. Okay.
Okay.
In other words, say for example, in this pursuit, there is a tendency, if we're not careful, to get unbalanced. You know, to maybe develop certain skills, devote certain time and energy to a certain facet of our life, and let the rest of it kind of go to pot. And what this is a hold up, wait a minute, you have to mature here in order to proceed. For example, some years ago, I had a young man who was, somewhere in the $12 million range, okay, in his pursuit. And he became very frustrated because he didn't seem to be able to break through. And we had a long, intensive talk. This was by phone. And I remember telling him that, we'll call him Joe. And I'll say, Joe, you know I love you, and so I'm going to take a liberty. I think probably what you're going to have to do is go back to school. Because he hadn't completed high school. He had no church affiliation. He had no spiritual facet to his life at all. He didn't have the social amenities. In other words, not having the education and not coming from that background of this kind of, wealth. He wasn't good at introducing people. He didn't often know what the right fork was to use. The minor things. And he was in a circle where that was kind of demanded. And I said, this is probably what you're going to have to do. And he did. And then he began to grow, and now he's worth about $32 million.
Wow.
Yeah.
So these are places where your weaknesses are revealed to you?
Exactly.
Or they become
apparent.
Uh-huh.
And you're going to have to spend it. Like, for example, this fellow searched around. He had never had a church home. And there was that part of him that, we do wonder about these things. I think everyone from the beginning of time has said, who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? Why am I here? And sometimes we have to look to the spiritual side of ourselves in order to determine that. Now, I'm not talking about religion necessarily, but just getting in touch with, our capacities and our gifts and where they might have come from, the cause for all of this. And so he had to have that. And certainly, at certain levels, there are social amenities that have to be honored. And he wasn't doing that. But he had to stop and mature. Okay. Now, some people may be good in those other areas, but they're not good with the money, and that's what they have to study. And so this is a search for balance. Okay. Now, what this is about, these are peak experiences. Now, what I've done is to take peak and make an acronym out of it. I think I can do it this way and squeeze it all on the paper. And a peak experience, I define essentially as where we predetermine what we're about to do. We have the capacity to do that, and what a gift it is. We just don't have to always just do what comes naturally.
We don't have to just react.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cognitively, we can say, okay, this is what I'm going to do toward the fulfillment of my task, my dream, whatever it happens to be. So if this is what I'm about to do, I can then evaluate the effect that that's going to have. See, whatever it is I'm going to do now, I can evaluate the effect that's going to have toward the fulfillment of my dream. All right? If it's appropriate. In other words, if it's not tension relieving instead of achieving, you know what I mean? If it's not non-productive instead of productive, that we can determine this is what I'm going to do, and we act on it. Just do it, knowing that it was the appropriate thing to have done at that point in time.
Bern, if I could, it seems like, especially when we're faced with big challenges in our lives or areas where we know we need to do something different, there's a real tendency to hesitate. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty, and we doubt ourselves and we don't always trust our judgment. I know I had a friend who told me once, if you wait and procrastinate on making decisions long enough, eventually you won't have to make the decision because someone will make it for you.
It'll be made for you.
And I think a lot of times we're more comfortable with letting someone else or, quote, circumstances make the decision for us instead of acting for ourselves. Why is that, and how can we overcome that?
That way it's not our fault. we can always blame them,
Yeah.
No, I think a lot of that is subconscious, too. Because if the subconscious mind clicks in, if we get in a state of confusion, see, a mind in confusion goes into conflict, which means the subconscious takes over and says, hold it, wait a minute, maybe we're okay right where we are. And the cognitive mind gets shut down. And oftentimes what we need to do is to reach outside ourselves for inspiration. It's kind of like, I've often said that, is there some facet of your life that's not working very well? Is there something that could be working better? Well, it's not going to get any better. It's not going to get any better, unless you get more information. And sometimes you've got to reach out. I talked with someone this morning, and this is undated, so that person probably wouldn't identify who he was. Delightful person, but really invested in already knowing. Really felt there was hardly anything at all that anyone could say or anything that he could read or hear that would make a difference in what he perceived as a complete and happy life. Now, at the present time, he's unemployed. He's been divorced for a short time. He's in an unsteady relationship. But he was insisting that that was all their problem. In other words, he didn't have a problem.
Complete denial.
Yeah. And it's just a delightful person with a lot of capacity, and I'm sure a lot of skills.
Well, see, that's what I see, is they're not even willing, a lot of times, to get the information. There's a hesitancy. I know at times for me, there's a a wanting to procrastinate, just
Sure.
to put it off, to not deal with it. It's too much headache, too much hassle, and it's easier just to go on as I am. And then I look back and I always kick myself because I realize what opportunities I missed out on.
We do know this, that if you're not peaking, what are you doing? Because there's no such thing as a vacuum here.
You're digressing.
You're valleying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you're moving along this line and you're not peaking, then there's going to be these things happening.
Yeah.
Okay? And this, remember, was in concert with purpose, and this is about posturing. And see, that's what's beginning to happen. If a person begins to slow down, they go into survival. And those they neglect get into a spot where they have to strive in order to survive and end up on that lifetime lifeline. Takes just as much time, unfortunately, just as much energy, not as much thought, perhaps, but, I mean, time moves on.
I think there is as much thought. It's just worrying and fear and
Probably so.
anxiety, and
Yeah.
certainly is certainly.
Now,
is
if
frustrating.
predetermining, evaluating, acting, and knowing is a peak experience, how many can a person have in a lifetime? It's just incredible, infinite numbers.
Yeah, probably.
How many in a year? How many in a month? How many in a week? How many in a day?
Well, it's kind of a matter of choice, isn't it?
That's right. And it has to be predetermined, though. See, in other words, in order to get this thing in focus, it's kind of like writing the book of life instead of reading it. And I was in seminar, oftentimes I'll kind of say, well, what we do, we saunter along, not necessarily dawdling, but not hurrying, and we do what we did before, and we stop and check back and say, whoops, I'm not satisfied. Tomorrow, I'm just going to be different. But then after a few moments sometimes, we're dawdling again. We're just kind of doing what we've done, thinking what we thought. You know, we've talked before about how we think 50,000 thoughts a day. And if we're not careful, it's the same thoughts we thought yesterday, and last week, and last month, and in the last decade. And that's a trick of the subconscious mind to keep you where you are. Remember, we talked about the status quo pro way back in Matters of Confidence. And the only way to really influence that is in predetermined, precognitive moments saying, hey, this is where I want to be, you know, the vision.
Yes.
And this is what I can do, and I'm prepared to do, or I'm willing to prepare to do right now. Little short increments. When you're doing this, by the way, you buy time. It's just a matter of how time will expand on you when you're actually doing this.
Really?
Oh, there's no question. When you compartmentalize the process into short, preconceived moments, if you would, yeah, it's kind of like oftentimes, and we're all subject to going into a flat state. And what I'll do at home oftentimes, I have a little timer similar to one we use here that I check once in a while because I don't watch an audience. I get lost in what we're doing and where we ran over time so many times. They said, put a clock out there. But I have one on my desk at home, and if I have one of those dawdling days, nothing is happening, I'll determine what I'm about to do, give myself 10 minutes, set the clock, and I just process. And when that bell rings, I'm down here. I knew that I did that. Set it for another 10 minutes, 15 minutes, depending upon the project. Can you believe if you do that all day, what you get accomplished?
Well, Bert, I know that with my children, that's the only way I get things done sometimes for them.
Little mini deadlines.
I say you have 5 minutes. You have to beat the timer, and it's amazing for them.
They begin to move.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's fascinating. Another way of affecting this in our life, too, is journalizing. You keep a journal, a daily journal?
Oh, you know, I haven't for years. I used to always keep a journal.
Probably a good time in your life, too,
Yeah.
when you did. My experience is that if a person keeps a journal, somehow their life works better.
Really?
Oh, I've always felt that way. It's kind of like if you know you're going to make a journal entry tonight that you're going to have to reread, that perhaps your children or your grandchildren will perceive in some way, it seems to me that it influences your day. I mean, in other words, it would. And certainly, I believe there's a point there somewhere where you could write your journal entry in the morning and then cause it to happen that way.
Right.
See?
Today I am going.
Yeah.
Today I am.
Yeah. It's kind of like people will say, have a nice day. And I'll say, well, thank you, I will. And sometimes they look at me funny, and it's, well, that puts them back a little bit.
Right.
But I decided a long time ago to have a good day-to-day. I mean, that's just the way you do.
That's a choice.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that every day is perfect, but there is an acceptance of authority about that you can influence the outcome if you take short, predetermined moments, evaluate the effect that's going to have, act on it, knowing it was the right thing to have done. I have seen people adopt this, and so for that matter, in an essay we call Criteria of Success, I have forms that actually apply to this. And the people who've used the forms and what have you have had extraordinary progress in short periods of time. You know this thing about so much to do, so little time? If you begin to compartmentalize and have these peak experiences, minimal ones, hours, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, things seem to somehow get easier. I had, some years ago, I was in a company where they did a lot of phone work. That's very difficult for some people. And this fella couldn't get on and stay on the phone. Just couldn't do it, overwhelmed by it. And so we broke it down into little half-hour increments that he had to do, and that didn't work. And we went to 15 minutes, and that didn't work. We went to 10 minutes, that didn't work. Finally, I got Paul down to the point where all you had to do is stay on the phone for 5 minutes. You know, a little timer, set it, go. Just do anything for 5 minutes. Practice. Don't expect any results. The guy became a star. He could do it in 5-minute increments. You know what I mean? Make one call at a time, re-brace himself, do another one. You know what I mean? And it really worked for him. It's just, and it's a shame how we tend to move through and look back rather than look forward and move to. And so all the difference in the world.
Are we talking about two different things here, Bern? On the one hand, we're talking about maybe principles of time management.
That sneaks in there, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? I was just noticing that.
And it's not so much time management as it is time consciousness. See, we don't manage time. I've always had a little difficulty with that because a second is a second, a minute's a minute, and an hour's an hour, and there's nothing you or I or anyone else is going to do about that.
So we're managing ourselves, hopefully, better or worse.
Yeah, it's kind of like people say, well, that's a semantical thing. I guess we should be saying utilizing our time. But this is another step. I mean, this is a time consciousness that, see, here's another thing, too. These are moments of focus. Okay, you can see where that would be. If you determine what you're about to do, that's focusing. And your energy levels go up.
Yes,
There's something that happens in the mind. The energy levels goes up, stamina increases, and your retentive and creative ability is enhanced. I can't even imagine what a person might do with their life if they could compartmentalize it into, 1 minute, 5 minute segments. My
goodness. I think the most successful people do.
Some do it unconsciously.
Yes.
Some people, I think, just naturally do this. But it is copyable, it's manageable, it's doable. But the idea is that it is a principle where a person can proceed and progress, and there's no way that it doesn't work. Just no way at all.
Well, and I read once, too, that they've done studies on people's work habits, and those who were able to focus on a task and concentrate for long periods of time had more success, but they also felt better at the end of the day.
Yes.
They felt like there's more satisfaction in themselves, more peace, more ability to relax at the end of that time, and a higher level of accomplishment.
I think there's a difference here, too. I know, for example, if a person typically now, it's not always true, has a job with an established income, 9 to 5 with breaks and what have you, they want that day to go over quickly. You know what I mean? To thank God it's Friday attitude. If someone is in business for themselves or pursuing a dream, I would think you'd want as much time in a day as you could get. Because you'd want the day to stretch out. Start early, work late if you wanted to. And this is how that occurs. You actually will have, it would seem like a longer day, but less fatiguing, like you say. And you get a lot more done with it. It's a fascinating concept. We do know this, that if a person does these things, like for example, this is the final in this little review of these things that we've done, but last week we talked about purpose as opposed to posture. That's reflected in this. About having a plan, that's reflected in this, and this in that. As all these things begin to form a tapestry of concepts and ideas that combine can give a person a lot of power.
Would you say that this is our purpose?
Yes.
To become this?
Yeah, I would think that the purpose is to grow and mature. The mission would be broken down. These are the things that we're doing in order to get there.
And the plan would also be part of this.
Yeah.
And so the plan could change.
Oh, it always does.
But the purpose is always going to be the same.
Yeah, you remember when we talked about purpose, it was a matter of a very short, crisp, abstract thing that identified what you were about, who you were. A mission is what you do. I mean, that's kind of a different thing. And a plan is how you're accomplishing it. Projects contribute to the plan, and the practicing is the willingness to just be there and do the best you can, knowing that it's going to get better. Probably in this whole series, the most important word, though, was practice.
Yeah, being willing to be bad at something
Yeah, be
until
willing to
you
clumsy.
get good at something.
Inadequate, even inappropriate.
Yeah.
It's like so many people I know who have never found their authority because they played too far inside the circumference.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, for example, if this was a person's real authority range, they play in here, never realizing, you know what I mean, that they could be out here and so much more effective. And the reason they don't get out there is they're afraid they'll go out here. This is called inappropriate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you don't know, you'll fall short consistently. And so that willingness to stretch, to go to the improbable, to the adventurous, seems to be the key.
You know, Bern, I was at a friend's house the other day, and I noticed a little child, 11 months old. I mean, maybe 1.5 feet tall. It's just a little tiny thing. And he was sitting on the floor, and he pushed himself up, and he started walking around the room, and and it really made me think, this little baby has not been on the earth even a year yet. And look how much he's progressed.
Yes, right. Oh,
from,
huge.
You know, and we all do that almost. I mean, everyone I know has learned to walk, and usually before they were 2. And certainly they were not in their comfort zone in that process. The times you fall down and bonk your head and you get up and you try again. And if we could just, I think, remember that we have it in us and know that we've accomplished so much in the past, that we can continue to perform at that level.
You know, something it pops into my mind when you talk about that, is there's a language out here that says the power within you,
Yeah.
you know, that hidden talent, a skill, and that's really not. So we're a vacuum. You know what I mean? We're a vacuum of ignorance and unpracticed capacities. And if we could realize that all of this growth that we're talking about is outside of us, you know what I mean? That we have to be inspired. And that as we seek out and reach and read and, you know, associate ourselves with people who are doing things that we may want to do, that's how we begin to find the clay to add to this frame, you know what I'm saying? To build a masterpiece. I know for years we talked in terms of an artist doesn't create a masterpiece with rocky clay. No, that's true. But the rocky clay or the good clay is outside of us, and we have to take it in. And if we could just understand that, why, that'd make a major difference.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes we expect more out of ourselves than we're prepared to do, and therefore we get frustrated. We should celebrate our ignorance every day. I don't know if you do that or not, but I would recommend to everybody, when you get up in the morning, God, boy, am I ignorant. You know what I mean? Yeah.
What a wonderful day to go out and get some more knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
See, that's a celebration, actually. We have to celebrate our ignorance so that we become aware that there are things to learn, things to do that we haven't done, experiences to have, and that's how we grow. But if a person feels they already know, they get incurious. Probably one of the great sins of the universe is incuriosity. Not a lack of curiosity. I mean, purposely not curious. Don't want to know.
It's safer.
Oh, yeah. And realize that's a trick of the mind, and that all these things are leading to break that through. I mean, to go on from that. This has been a fun series. I think that one of the key issues, too, is to be careful of the word goal. I'm not against goal setting. I hope I didn't convey that idea. I'm just kind of put off by some of the languaging that we've used in goal setting. And frankly, what was the word I substituted? Do you remember? Rather than goals, I recommend that we define our
Purpose.
A purpose and pursuits. What are we going after? That chicken in a corn patch thing. I do know this, that a person starts functioning in this peak-to-peak way, establishes their purpose and what have you, and begins to practice, and then goes back and crystallizes, remember that, and categorizes and compartmentalizes, that once they're old king of the hill or queen of the mountain, whatever it happens to be, people are going to crowd around and wonder how they did it. They'll say things like, gee, they were lucky, they had a great gift, or, right person at the right time. And what it really is just a process. It's the exercising of a gift that we have. And you know, a lot of this too, we have to bear in mind is that we have to use our mind to scoot out into the future and the past, okay, and then pull back and get right into the moment and do, and then occasionally peek out, you know what I mean, and then come back, and in that seems to be the great secret of success.